Well, I'm very happy to be here. It's been a couple of days of very inspiring presentations. And what I loved was that it was both from the creative standpoint and a real commitment to quality editorial, but also finding about creative ways to fund all these projects and make sure that these magazines continue to be viable. Now, one thing we were talking about earlier was, where do you get your inspiration from? You know, what do you tap into to keep that creativity going? So maybe we can start with you, Caitlin. Where do you go to fill that source?
You know, I have so many answers to this question, so it'll be really hard for me to take this. I was excited to talk about this topic, and now I have like 30 answers to the question. But I like looking at the media space. Obviously, that's always been particularly, informative, inspirational. Our magazine, like many, was really inspired by Monocle. Just seeing the way that Monocle created a creative agency, an events company, and a store was really inspiring to us, so that it became like sort of this 360 immersive ecosystem, watching the early days of Vice, which went from a free magazine in my hometown of Montreal, given away at skate and clothing shops, to now, a overvalued, but just behemoth in all media channels. I'm also watching folks like Highsnobiety and Hypebeast, people who sort of do what we aspire to do in the culture, and do it, whether it's with brick and mortar stores or doing like sort of award-winning sort of creative work along with intrepid storytelling, and just simply people like Graydon Carter, who, for better or for worse, led Vanity Fair for, at least 2 or 3 decades, and then went on to create something in the newsletter space, Airmail, that's, if you go down London's Chiltern Street and look at the, in Marylebone, and you see a newsstand called Shriji, they've taken over the wrap and use it to launch their new issues. So really, I think for me, the key is being both in this niche world of indie publishing and also this niche world of tennis. It's really important for us, both from a mission perspective, but also sort of a good business practice, to always look outside from like what our, compatriots are doing, and think about how to, essentially replicate or try to riff on some of the stuff that we find really exciting. And so whether that's people themselves individually, to, other media companies, to companies that are, like a Hodinkee, who's created a watch dialogue that didn't exist a couple of years ago, and all of a sudden is the preeminent conversation and the preeminent sort of space and event and reseller of these vintage watches. Not something I particularly like, but something that I can certainly replicate. So good question. I'm really curious to hear everybody else's answers, because I always keep a list of things to check out.
Over to you, Melony. How about you?
I think curiosity is the best thing we can have as people working in media, so that we can see where good ideas are coming from all over the place. When I was a publisher at Canadian Art, and I was being set up for a meeting in New York, and the person asked me, well, do you want to meet the people at Flash Art? I'm like, no, I don't need to talk to another trade magazine. I really want to meet the people who publish fitness, because I want to steal all their ideas and translate them somehow into a visual arts context, right? And when I was at Azure, I was thinking, well, how can I translate, the delivery of digital issues? What can I learn from the way airports distribute Wi-Fi to deliver digital issues at the Milan Salon de Mobili, right? So it's just like whatever is cool and interesting that can help deliver your product is what I take from. But I think I've learned from the way political campaigns use digital communications. I think they're sort of more advanced and sophisticated than we are in the traditional media space. There's amazing integration, and just learning from the Barack Obama campaign, like just as a single item, was like a masterclass. I'm interested in the history of innovation. Like things that were invented 100 years ago have some important lessons to teach us now. And that's not just because I work at a history magazine. like Spanish flu has taught us about COVID. And the way we innovate today depends a lot on like global collaboration and mass collaboration, the way it was done in the past too. And then finally, I think watching my children, like, and how they communicate with their peers, what kind of communications platforms they use, how they interact in a way that's completely different from the way my generation or millennials, interact online. And in fact, how they define activism and how they define what's fair and what's equitable and what they define as action. It's influenced me a lot. And they're teaching me a lot. And they never they never fail to let me know about it. I'm getting schooled.
I could relate to that one. How about you, Janine?
Well, when people ask me about inspiration, like that's what Uppercase job is to inspire people in the sense of creating something, right? So for me, inspiration is the visual inspiration of seeing what my readers are creating and seeing where their creativity is leading them. And so I'm always looking at my readers through social media. That's a great way of doing it. And looking at their websites and having conversations with them that's what I love to do to inspire me, because that's where I'm going to find like a little inkling of what another theme might be for a future issue, or I might discover someone who has really great thoughts about a particular niche topic that I'd like to explore. So as I said in my presentation, like the relationship that I have with my readers is really important. And part of that is as a source, a well of inspiration for me. And when it comes to business inspiration and running the Uppercase little show here, I like to look at tech companies, and I've always been an early adopter to technology. That's how I've been able to do so much just as a one-person operation, is looking at how is the new technology, how can it help me to run systems and to have like a good content management system for my own ideas. Like I use particular technology for that. So those are my two areas of inspiration.
Can I ask you a follow-up about that? Just because I was so curious during your presentation to hear about your relationship with Instagram. I love the fact that it seems like more of a dialogue than a top-down sort of dissemination tool for you. Because for us, it's like very much about, we tell you what's cool and aspirational. Whereas it sounds like for you, mainly because of, maybe a combination of bandwidth and choosing where to make, your priorities matter versus, getting excited. But what do you get from that? Like, I'm so curious, like what would happen to ours if we kind of let it run feral a little bit more?
Yeah, well, like 2.5 years ago, before pandemic, I used to post frequently, and I was going places and doing things, so I could post about that. It felt more natural. But trying to schedule content, I've tried that. I've done it when I'm promoting like some of these, I'm affiliate for some business courses and things. And so I've scheduled media then, but it doesn't feel authentic to me. And anything that I do for Uppercase has to feel authentic to me. So for the past while, I haven't personally felt like posting on Instagram, so I haven't. And there's been months and months going by when I didn't do anything at all. And it did not negatively impact my business. In fact, I've had more subscribers than ever, and more, oddly enough, more people follow me on Instagram the less I post. So it's like it, and I just posted something this past week because I have all these projects that are coming out. Like I probably should post about it. And I talked in there about this inverse relationship that I have. Like I'm shy and I'm quiet and I don't like hoopla and stuff. So the more people who follow me on Instagram, the less likely I am to post. And that's just how it is. And thankfully, there's lots of people on Instagram who are amplifying Uppercase to their like 50 friends on Instagram or their 100 followers. I don't care about people who have giant accounts, because for me, Uppercase is like the one-on-one, the personal, the tactile, the handmade, the crafting. And so that's small social media, and that's what works for me. So yeah.
Now that is, I think, a good segue into something else I was wondering about, and that's user-generated content. We hear about that a lot these days in media. I'm just wondering, how much do you tap into that, and is it a true strategy when it comes to, maintaining a creative magazine? Melony, do you want to start off with that?
Sure. Our old website had comments. When we created our new one, we took away comments, and we just decided to move any commenting to social media. But because history relates to politics, obviously, we have to spend a lot of time moderating, because on Facebook, things are getting really ugly. And just moderating all those comments, like, it's very time consuming. And I think Janine's right. Like, you can't be everywhere. You can't be posting on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and doing all this, and then producing a magazine, doing events, doing all this other stuff. You got to choose what's the best fit for you, because if it means you're trying to do everything, it means you're not probably doing the core of what you're doing. But in terms of user-generated content, it's just something we have to monitor carefully on social media. We do publish books on occasion, and they're usually quite large press-run books. So 100 Photos That Changed Canada, 100 Days That Changed Canada, and they're, press runs about 50,000 or whatnot. So they're good money earners for us. But the most recent one we did was the Great War album, and that was 4 years ago. Is that right? And it was user-generated content. We invited our readers to send in artifacts and, their letters and, just things from their family from the First World War. So there were a lot of, we had to hire someone to help elderly people learn how to scan things and, or send in photos. And anyway, we did a gorgeous book. And it was primarily user-generated user content, and then essays by, leaders and experts on the First World War. But so I think for us, it has a place, and within the history, we do like fora and events for people who teach in history and curators and historians. And so we have those events where, the people who read us are also our contributors, and there are also people who are, going to our conferences and events and winning our Governor General's History Awards.
How about you, Caitlin?
Yeah, I'm actually glad Melony took the brunt of this one for me, because I actually think, candidly, we've moved quite away from user-generated content. In my prior lives, specifically when I was in public media, we did project after project after project that was crowdsourced, feedback, sourcing voices from the community, all of this work that I'm really proud of, and that remains vital for that type of an organization. But we also did find that without its own department, its own chair, these things can either become extremely self-selecting. And to give you an idea, here in New York, when I was working at WNYC, any project we did would over-index for hearing from the Upper West Side and Park Slope. And it was white, and it was the same socioeconomic class, and it was the same sort of voices, not necessarily voices that were incompatible with what you think about public radio, but and so anytime we did a crowdsourcing project, and one I actually worked on at WNYC was this thing called Talkbox, where we sort of retrofitted a public telephone and took it around to more diverse parts of the city, Bed-Stuy, Weeksville. We put it in Staten Island, just basically to try to get people to interact with public radio, because our listenership was so, I don't want to say one-dimensional, but not multi-dimensional. And it taught me a few things about how to do this kind of project. And exactly what Melony said, I felt like it was great and worthwhile if you had a worthwhile receptacle for it, which in our case was the airwaves, in which case you're hearing different voices, literally from a tonal perspective that you might not always. And when that's not necessarily something you need to, you sort of have the resources to do really right. And I think for us, the way we like to interact with our audience is not by having them create content for us, but rather having them give us feedback by coming to events. And we're super, super responsive on social media. So for us, we have a Discord channel. It's much more about having a conversation. But when we present material, we like to, for better or for worse, and we can have, a conversation about some of the power structures we might be replicating or not. But I think for better or for worse, we like to intake a lot of information from our community, really be thoughtful about how we're hiring, who we're choosing to tell stories with and about, and then make that the result of feedback where it's a little less self-reinforcing. Because if you think about tennis and you think about the people who can afford an indie magazine, a lot of times that might also be the same thing in terms of what they want to see. We hear from a lot of men. We don't necessarily hear from a lot of women, even though our audience is roughly 50-50, which for a sports title is insane. Usually it's a lot closer to 80-20. So I think for us, this moment in time with how we're set up, doing that feels like a very few and far between sort of endeavor because of these lessons and because of what doing it right can mean. And also how you can very quickly, basically lose your head of steam and spend a lot of time, reflecting back a bunch of bros in our case, which you don't necessarily want. But it's a great question and something that I think, we should continue talking about as news organizations because it's a really interesting balance.
How about you, Janine?
Well, Uppercase is about its readers. So my relationship is that the more people contribute and participate in the open calls for submissions, and there's always an open pitch form where people can put in their suggestions or people will email me, like that is what is the success of Uppercase. It's of course easier in a visual subject matter that people can submit images of their work, and either it's a really great thing that they've created or maybe not so much, but it's evaluated on visual aesthetics as well as content and intention, but definitely something that I promote in every project. So even the book projects that I do, like the art supply one, for example, a lot of it, like these are companies that I've curated and I've invited to be in the book, but there's always an open call for all my readership to submit. So in addition to there being like 100-year-old companies in this book, there's also people who are creating artwork using like art supplies by recycling stuff from their kitchen, right? So that there's always that range of people included in all my projects. And that's what makes it really interesting for me.
That's great. One thing I was curious about, you go ahead. Melony, you had a question?
I was just going to say too, it depends on how you define user generated, right? So like if we give our platform over to a guest editor, like it's Natasha Henry, who's the president of the Ontario Black History Society or the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, like that's, they're part of our audience, but they're also, experts in their own histories. And so, it feels right for us because we do have a strong platform of 2 million Canadians a year, and to just give over that platform to other stories so that we're not necessarily writing them, maybe we're not even curating them, or maybe we are. It's a bit amorphous, and they're experts, but they're also, audience members. So
right now that makes me think of DEI, and especially for your publication when you're dealing with a subject matter that's so complex. History, through whose lens, how do you tell it? Who do you tell it to? Where do you find reliable sources? How do you frame different events throughout history? How does DEI factor in your planning of your content, how you distribute it, and do you keep metrics on how you're doing on that front?
So, in terms of commissioning content, that would be for our editorial department. But in terms of hiring, in terms of commissioning content, certainly we're diversifying. We're handing over our platform more often now. And like, for example, we did a children's issue called In English and French. And when the French edition came out, it was called En Sécurité. So in English, it was called Seeking Safety. So we had a limited number of copies to distribute, but I mean, I think what was important to me was that they be distributed in an area where, you know, there were high numbers of people who were new to Canada. So, you know, they weren't going to the first schools that signed up. I don't know if you saw in the news how private schools in Ontario got all the COVID rapid tests and public schools got none, because those private schools have staff. So they have the ability to sign up and get those extra bonus things. It really angers me. And, you know, for that on security issue, I really wanted to say, okay, these are going to the areas, we're going to focus on the outer ring of the GTA, where there are a lot of essential workers are working in warehouses, you know, they're shipping things across the country. And, you know, for the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation publication, we're holding back 15% of the press run, which is like 200,000. We're holding back a percentage of that because, you know, it's not just the keeners, you know, we're developing our own internal list of teachers and schools that are in areas where there's like high numbers of new Canadians, or their poverty levels, or you know, reserves. So we want to make sure that those publications, which are free, go to those kids, especially since their internet access is also low. So, I mean, we take it on in a bunch of different ways. So when we are fortunate enough to have a corporate sponsor come in to do a publication, obviously, much of the time it's on a subject that would be of interest to, you know, people who haven't had their story told as much. And oftentimes it's for kids, because Gen Z is the most diverse generation in Canada. And it's important that we get their stories are told to them from their community, and we're just like the conduit.
Okay. Do you keep metrics for that? Like, do you have specific things that you track?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're Vividata audited. So for audiences age 14 and up, I have quite detailed data about the audience, but our kids' publications, they're for under 14s, so they're not measured by Vividata. But I do have I know the number of copies. I know that during the pandemic, we delivered, by the end of September, we'll have delivered 900,000 copies of our children's publications free of charge to kids in school. So that is super important to me. And as long as we can keep finding the philanthropic support to do that, I think it's, you know, the audience metrics are, I mean, by number of copies. And, you know, I apply a very conservative multiplier to that because I don't like overestimating. And, you know, I'm hopeful that some of our copies, well, for example, we just repackaged our children's comics for a program that's going to be used for the Ontario Ministry of Education for elementary schools. So I have to look it up again, but I mean, I think it's 500,000 kids would potentially have access to that. But I'll get analytics so that I can report on it, obviously, because it's great news.
Yeah. How about you, Janine? I mean, you showed us a couple of great examples.
Well, what is the question again? About metrics?
No, how does DEI factor into how you develop your magazine?
What is DEI again?
Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, I've always had a really diverse readership, but they haven't been as visible. And that's partly on me, but also I have to say that when I did the Black Lives Matter issue, and I was very vocal about why I was doing it, and I invited people who already were part of the uppercase community to be part of that, that like it's all that inclusivity has always been part of Uppercase, that everyone is welcome to submit. And I publish a wide variety of people, different ages, different backgrounds, different parts of the world, different age, like levels of, so-called professional to, amateur artists. So that's always been in there, but it's not always been visible who the people are, because I'm always focusing on the artwork. So I've made a conscious decision to show the people, so that people know that there's actually a very diverse group of people. So I have had Muslim contributors before, for example, but during Donald Trump era, my particular person who's a photographer, she didn't want to put images of herself in there because she was afraid of walking down the street, and she didn't want to have her face out anywhere. And so, that was really awful to understand why she didn't want to be like promoted as one of the people within the magazine, but I could understand that. But since, 2020 or so, more people have been willing, and I'm very grateful for this, to put their faces in the magazine and to be proud of who they are and to share their stories. And so I'm very grateful to those people, because I know they've been reading Uppercase all along, and I'm just so thrilled that now they feel comfortable. And I think it's because of those issues that I did that said, please feel comfortable. You're welcome here, that people are participating in that way. So I'm very happy that's now part of the Uppercase culture, which I've been trying to nurture for a while. So, yeah.
That's great. How about you, Caitlin?
For us, it's about who we pay. It's about who we pay. I feel like, it's one thing for us to cover issues of access and discuss, equity, and we do that, and we have since the very first issue. Amplifying is one part of our responsibility, I think, as a media company. But I have to say, having been, I think largely because I'm gay, and every news organization I've ever worked for has considered that diversity, for better or for worse, I have found myself on many, many, many inclusion panels, incubators, discussions. And at the end of the day, the thing that mattered the most out of all of these voices that we gathered in all these different newsrooms, I did this at the Washington Post, I did this at Time Magazine, I did this at WNYC, or public radio station that I spoke about a little earlier. At the end of the day, the things that mattered the most were who has an audience facing voice, whether that's on broadcast at a public radio station, or writing the pieces, or photography, or being featured. That's a big thing that I think all of us sounds like are pretty committed to. Who are we paying? So who's on staff, who's in the meetings, who's pitching the clients, who's having the discussions, who's benefiting, and how are we addressing equity in that regard, whether it's job searches or internships or fellowships or whatever it is. And I think for us, the third thing was we pay people above average so that they'll do their best work. And I think at the end of the day, one thing I keep hearing from, especially BIPOC in this country is, show me with the way that you treat me with the way that I'm paid. And I think for us, that's something we can do. It's something we do. And it means that we get the best contributors. Also like I think, again, every one of our print magazines is the living proof of this. We have something approaching 50% women. We have a over-indexed amount of Black, Indigenous, Asian, Latinx, and other voices. For us, it's about who do we hire, who do we pay, and what stories are we, helping them tell. And I think for us, that's been a tremendous effort, and it will continue to be, because also, as I mentioned yesterday in my presentation, it's good business. It's the right thing to do, but it's good business. Like, tennis hasn't benefited from a very diverse conversation in every sense of that word ever. And so if we're the only people talking about it, all of a sudden people who are interested in the kinds of things we're discussing and platforming will find us and not our competition. And so for us, it has been baked in from the jump about how we do it. And at the end of the day, it comes down to who we pay.
I'm on the board at the National Media Arts Foundation, and one thing we started this year, which I think was really important, was a mentorship program for people in the media space, not so that it's like the entry level junior positions, but for BIPOC, making a leap into to being part of the strategy and management and decision making, so that the mentees would be mentored by high level media executive, because I think that's missing from Canadian media, for sure. And so hopefully we'll be able to do it again next year. So if anyone's interested in applying. I know it was oversubscribed though. I mean, we got a great response.
I mean, that word mentorship, I think, is really crucial, especially for all of you who seem to really be driving passion projects, things you feel very strongly about. How, when you're looking at the future of your magazines, do you have a specific plan for growing who will be the next iterations of you? How do you plan that? Do you do internships? How do you do it? Janine?
I'm training my son.
That is great.
I'm literally growing my own. No, but he's in the magazine.
So cute.
He can do whatever he wants, but he's naturally talented in writing and those sorts of things. And he's always, since I'm mostly at home working, he's like behind my shoulder, always like saying, "What are you doing?" He understands all the stuff I do, how to fill the orders and all those things. So maybe someday he can take over. By the time I'm at issue 100, I'll be 60 something and he'll be 20 something. So the math there would work out. So that's my only plan. And if he doesn't, I'm at issue 54. I'm going to get to issue 100 and then I'll decide. And I could just retire. I don't know.
Right. We'll I've got a kid for you too.
Yeah. I've tried to
I'm a designer, up and coming.
I've had interns a long time ago. It just doesn't work for me as a one person thing. I don't have the time to pay attention to someone here in the office in the way that they would be deserving to have like a full mentorship or internship. So I haven't been able to do that, but I try to be available to my readers. If they have any questions, they want my advice on something, I'm around. So that's the best I can do.
How about you, Kitling? I mean,
I love the idea of incubating my own. I wish I'd thought of that. That's a really genius. That's a super genius answer. You know, it's interesting. We have started with our newer staff pass along more and more responsibilities as we get a little bit more into the esoteric stuff. Like a lot more of our work has looked like IP development for film and TV and some larger concepting around the business in a way that, you know, we've had to be freed up from a little bit more of the day-to-day operations. One thing that I'm a little bit worried about, but also probably need to get over is just the sensibility that drives a small publication. You know, it's hard not to get precious about that and feel like in the test runs we've had with people taking over an issue or even, you know, the sort of digital content apparatus for a short time, they've been rough. And I don't know if that's because we're too finicky about it, my co-founder and I, or if we just haven't like sort of given enough kind of directions or maybe haven't found the right people. But it's a really good question because I don't have a very good answer. And the truth is, I think so many of these, you know, we've left an era of like star editors where, you know, Anna Wintour's the last really of her kind. On the other hand, I think a lot of these smaller concerns really are where the personality of the founding team can be a lot more sort of present. And so I don't know what it looks like when we're dead, but I hope to not find out because I think it would probably, I would probably find lots of fault with it and it wouldn't be the most pleasant experience. So yeah, I don't know, but now I'm worried about it.
That wasn't the idea.
No,
Melony?
A list of anxieties grows day by day.
We have public historians on our staff. Public historians are people who try to communicate history to the general public, like not academic. You know, they're academic, but they're about communicating to larger audiences. So we do have it's called the Nobleton Scholar Program. And so we bring a young public historian into our team every year. We just took part in the Alberta Magazine's had a Indigenous Intern Fund. It must have been for the entire West. Our office is in Winnipeg. And so we took part in that and made an amazing hire through that program and have hired that person now, really young, talented designer, multimedia. It's great. I think the remote working thing from has helped us diversify our staff, because I mean, in Winnipeg, there's, it's just Winnipeg, but now we can grow our pool of talent anywhere in the country. So we have a foreign student working for us in Vancouver now too. So I think internships or residencies are a great opportunity. When I was at Canadian Art, we started what we called it, which is no longer, unfortunately. We had an editorial residency, and there, I didn't want to make it I didn't want a crappy paid internship. I wanted like a fantastic amount of money for that limited residency, so that whoever won that, it was a plum, for any up and coming Canadian writer on Canadian art. So I think, internships are, need to be paid fairly. Otherwise, you're just having interns who are financially self-sufficient. And I remember going for an interview at the New Yorker and the internship there, and I really wanted to be there, but I came from a single parent family, so I couldn't afford to do it. So I feel really passionate about the fact, we got to pay. And Caitlin, your point is who are you paying?
Yep.
It's too true. And yeah.
Now, one thing I was curious about is data. And when you're working with collaborators, be it on special editions or maybe events, how much access to your data do they typically ask for? And how guarded are you with those numbers? And when I speak of data, I mean sort of who your audience is, how is it broken down, what is their behavior when they're consuming your content, that sort of thing.
Is that for me because I did the data presentation?
You could start us off if you want to.
We have a lot of our demographic data in our media kit. If there's, if a client has a question like, how much Canadian wine does your audience drink? I can find that out. What percentage goes to the Art Gallery of Ontario or the Music Museum in Calgary? I can find that out too. But in terms of do we lurk people online, individually? Of course, we don't do that. That's a waste of time. But I mean, we would share open rates, we would share demographic information, behavioral information, but I mean, none of it's tied to a person. I mean, I can't. Have you been asked for data that's compromising? I was kind of. I wouldn't say
compromise. I wouldn't say compromising, but we've had some partners go as far as asking, for contact lists or for specific uses, things like that. And the standard answer is no. But I find that more and more we get those types of questions, people wanting more and more data and as granular as possible.
Yeah, I mean, we rent our mailing list. I mean, there's a suppressed list that we can't rent, but we do rent our mailing list, like a lot of magazines. We don't rent our email list. We charge people if they want to do an email to our list. But no, I wouldn't, we don't share personal information. Or, I mean, I think I can even find out people's voting patterns, but I'm
gonna log off of this chat right now.
Well, I don't think it says which party they vote for, but I can pull how high they rank, the environment in their charitable giving. That's going to tell you a lot about who they vote for, right? But I've never given that out. Yeah.
How
about you, Caitlin?
I interpreted your question in a sort of a different way, and maybe that speaks to some of the different ways that, we get asked this sort of stuff. From us, it's like a commercial endeavor where, we're often asked, Rolex quarterly sends us an email, what's your, audited circ and what's the addresses? And for us, they buy on scale. We're never going to get their business, and there's no good.
You could totally get their business. Canadian Art used to get their business. You should have
Here's what I will say. Our ad sales department, which doesn't exist, and Janine, I'm very sympathetic to not wanting to be an ad sales person, doesn't exist. And so we would never sell a page. What I would say to Rolex is, listen, we have a 50K minimum. It's for our creative work. Let us know when you want to do a watch collab. And that's an arrogant and, sort of very aggressive response. But the truth is we're not in the scale business. We're in the aspiration business. And so for us, I am cagey about our numbers, not because I'm not proud of the fact that we're, in the low mid 5 digits for our circulation. It's great. We're making money and everyone's happy getting it and it's growing steadily. On the other hand, because we're not monetizing that number as much as we're monetizing their sort of allegiance and their lack of sensitivity to price, it's just a different conversation that I'm keen to change. And so for us, anytime I'm asked that, it's resetting the conversation to make sure that they know they're not dealing with a traditional magazine or a traditional publication. Yeah. Time magazine used to sell Rolex ads. I'm sure it still does. Who reads Time magazine? And I say this having worked there, right?
Yeah. Canadian Art was less than 20,000. Azure was less than 20,000. They had those luxury.
Your Canadian Rolex spend is different than the Rolex USA, and
that's true.
Okay, we should relocate to Canada and take advantage of that. Wouldn't be the first time I've thought about it.
Do some newsstand dumping.
There you go.
How about you, Janine?
Well, this is irrelevant to my business. It's not the sort of relationships that I have with. I don't have any outside partners or collaborators that this would be an issue. And so the data that I have of my subscribers is very personal, and I don't share it. And the newsletter is, you have to sign up to be on that thing. I'm not going to use it in any way. So those are the things that's important to me. And I did have a watch ad in my magazine a long time ago. Fossil was a paid advertiser, and they subscribed because their art department got subscriptions to the magazine, and they contacted me and said, hey, you want to have a Fossil ad in the magazine? I said, okay, sure. So that was cool. But that was like my only touch with big advertisers, and it came and went, and it was cool while it lasted, and never going to happen again. Yeah.
Now, since we're all talking about creativity, I'm just curious, if you're projecting yourself a few years ahead, where do you think the boundaries of creativity in producing magazines is being pushed the most? Is it in sort of the delivery platforms? Who's contributing to the content? Where are you seeing that you're pushing boundaries the most? Caitlin, do you want to start, since you've got that media company side as well?
That's true. I think where we are trying to push forward is to be seen as it doesn't seem like a very innovative idea on its face to us at all, which is to be a multi-channel media company as opposed to a print magazine. So what that means to us is it's more interesting. We'll have a film that's currently in production out with A24, hopefully by the end of this year, if not early next year. That's incredibly exciting. I don't know of another independent media company that's doing that. And that's not it's more because that's our focus as opposed to, doing a special issue or creating, more editorial work. For us, that allows us to sort of punch above our weight in a way that creates a brand halo that we want to sort of be known for incredible storytelling, whether it's on your coffee table or on a streamer or in an immersive event. And so for us, I think, this is going to sound familiar given what I talked about yesterday in terms of my case study, but I think for us, it's way more about reining the rest of the world into our vision of things, which still feels like we're not quite there yet. I know what Racquet, the ultimate sort of expression is, and we're, I would say, maybe a quarter of the way there, given what my aspirations are. And until we get to that, then I'll, I don't know, turn my attention to creating some weird one-off print publications and other weird subjects that I want to do. We want to do a ski magazine. We want to do a magazine about dark matter. We have some weird project ideas, but I think for me, it's can we realize the vision that we had in 2016 when we launched, which was a multifaceted company driven by sensibility with a print magazine in its center and all this storytelling sort of vehicle around it. And when we get there, then I'll come back to this conversation and tell you what's next.
Sounds good. How about you, Janine?
Well, one thing I've been toying with is, since I'm at over 50 issues and the majority of them are sold out, and there's lots of amazing content and stories that are no longer available to people. So I'm always being asked, like, well, why don't you can I just get that digitally and stuff? And I don't really want to just, sell a PDF of an old issue, because that's not how it was designed. It's just not going to work. So what I've been toying with is uppercase reissue. And that would be like kind of the best of, and taking stories and coming, like every issue is themed, but I can re-theme them. I could pick all the stories that are about the color red or a particular medium or something, and then put that together in a digital way that people would subscribe to as an extra for like really gung-ho subscribers who want everything, and they would get something from that. And it would also revisit people I've featured in the magazine and talk about like what's happened since they were featured and where has their work evolved. So that's something that I'm thinking about doing. I just have to figure out the numbers of the math and how I would pay an editor to take care of it, because it's not something that I could do again all by myself. But I think that's the next thing I'm going to be doing. And it's sort of contrary to all the print first stuff, but print will still always be very first. And the stuff that would be in this reissue is things that are like years old, that they're out of print. They're not available anywhere else. It's not like I would put new content in that digital realm. So that's something interesting that I'm going to be attempting the next little while.
How about you, Melony?
I think for me, I'll be looking at our audience stats to see how our audience shifts over the years, and that will determine, the sort of content strategy that we have in terms of what we talk about and what platforms we talk about it on. I think print is going to continue, like I especially in niche and passion projects. And, when Caitlin and Janine, your magazines are gorgeous. And I think people will continue to want those things, and they can succeed at, a lower press run, which is amazing, especially Janine, if you're charging the amount you're charging. That's what The Economist does. When someone else raises their price, they make theirs higher because they want to be perceived as the most valuable. I think I'm going to be watching over the next 3 years, because we've come up with this strategy of doing classroom distribution for our children's title. That's what I'm going to be watching in the next few years. And as those younger people age, what do their habits become? Do they convert to pay print magazine subscribers? I don't know. Like I'm trying to imagine, would my kids buy a magazine? Maybe. I mean, everyone thought millennials wouldn't, but they are. So there's a lot of competition out there for people's attention. But, there's research that shows that younger people are turning off devices to read things in print, especially books. So I think there's opportunity. We just have to watch what people are doing and what the trends are.
Now, as an extension of that, especially for people who maybe weren't there for both days, what would be your one takeaway that you'd want people to really think about when they consider how to successfully run a magazine and being creative about making it sustainable? Anybody want to jump in?
Sure.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say
Go ahead, Janine.
You really have to know and love your audience, know who your readers are, and you're there to serve their needs. And hopefully along the way, you're producing something that is true to your values and expresses the intention of your publication.
Caitlin?
Yeah, I think great. Well said, Janine. I think for me, it's learn to recognize opportunities that might not on their face be in your bailiwick, and maximize those so that any opportunity you have to grow your audience or to sort of expand your footprint so that you can sustain yourself is not something you miss. I remember early on, I gave a panel discussion with some other titles at South by Southwest, and somebody asked us, would we ever consider doing a white label for a new idea? Would we ever help design and create a new magazine? And my instinct was to be like, oh, we wouldn't never do that. It's like, why? We have the resources, we have the contacts, we have the designers, they're looking for more work. We have tons of journalists who are keen to get paid. We have a really cool lens. And the guy sitting next to me was like, oh, we'll do that for you. And don't get me wrong, I was more than happy that he answered the question that way, but it was just such an obvious, like, oh, great. This is something that is translatable. And if you've amassed a lot of this knowledge and resource in one place, don't be afraid to be flexible about how you deploy it, especially if that means for projects that you believe in that feel central to the mission, and other ways to create revenue that, again, make sure everybody gets paid and make sure you can keep the lights on. You can get to issue number 50 like Janine has done. And it's not just a beautiful idea that, dies after issue number 2, which is, let's be honest, like many, many, many small independent publications, right? So think about, okay, how do I do this for years? Part of it is the growth that I've planned for, but also part of it is being opportunistic about the opportunities that come my way and not being so precious that I can't figure out a way to accommodate at least a portion of them.
Lenny?
Yeah, to Janine's point, know your audience, and also don't make assumptions about your audience. I'm going to just assume everyone looks at their Google Analytics to understand what your readers are interested in if your material is online, but really understand their habits and their passions and their behaviors and their beliefs, and then also watch your renewals. If you're doing a print magazine, like really, that is like should be a number one priority in your business. Just don't forget that. It always surprises me that smaller, especially for smaller publications where it is a 1 or 2 person shop, that gets pushed to the side because it's not as fun. I get it, but Janine, you said you had a 58% renewal rate. That's amazing. I mean, if you have niche, that's what it should be.
Mm-hmm. On the flip side of that, just for fun, biggest mistake you made, and but one that really taught you a lot. Sorry to put you on the spot, but I always find these quite interesting to see what people learn from tripping up.
Hire slowly and fire quickly. I am very sympathetic to Janine, your story of having to let members of your staff go. And it sounds like it wasn't because they weren't great, but just because your business model changed and you were pivoting. But for us, we made the mistake of assuming, especially in a small company, that somebody who'd maybe done the same job at a larger company would have the skills and ability to be part of a smaller team. There's no place to hide in a small team. Everybody has to be, if not excellent, then smart and flexible and trainable. And I think I would rather hire people who are smart and can learn the specificities of renewals and some of the print peccadillos that go along with having a magazine, as opposed to somebody who might be a specialist but isn't used to working in a small organization where we're all sort of wearing a couple of different hats. And I think that has to do with and I think it also has to do with like having an understanding of like the larger media landscape and what the opportunity is, right? Like I'd rather have media savvy people who can learn a specific skill as opposed to specifically skilled people who don't really understand the larger media ecosystem. So be very careful about who you hire, I think.
Janine?
Yeah, I agree. And like I said in my presentation, like the low point was just when I realized that all the joy is being sucked out of my business because I was too busy trying to build a business that I thought I was supposed to be doing, like having employees and having an office and all these things I thought I was supposed to be doing to have a magazine. And then when I got rid of all of that, I realized I can do whatever magazine I want and it can just be me anywhere I go. And it's so much simpler and far more interesting for me that way.
Melanie, how about you?
I think the question about scaling business is that Janine's talking about is important. I've been in organizations where, you know, the scale of the number of staff wasn't quite right, and it created issues in staff. But I think I've made lots of gaffes over the years, but I don't think they're really good learning points for anyone in the office in the session. But I do think you know, trying to have like a Senate in your brain, like a sober second thought, like not jumping at every new shiny thing, you know, just because so-and-so is on Instagram and, you know, your competition has a huge Twitter following and these guys have, you know, a popular YouTube channel. Like, it doesn't mean that you know, you have to jump and do all those things too. And, because if you're jumping and I mean, I've been in a situation where we've been stretched too thin. And when you're doing that, it means you're not, it's being indecisive. Like, I think you have to be more intentional and decisive about what you're doing, because if you're scrambling all over the place, you're missing out on opportunities. And so, you know, in my presentation, I was saying my mantra is mission, revenue, audience, right? And so I really try to think just of that. And, you know, if someone has an idea that's, oh, let's do this. I'm like, yeah, it's cool. But yeah, it happens. And then it doesn't deliver on the fundamentals, right? So why are you doing it? So I think we just have to be really thoughtful and not leap at absolutely everything.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing from all of you is having a real respect for your audience and the fact that they're just as passionate about the content and the culture around what you're doing than you are. I mean, that's something that it seems that you've been able to really do and just stick to that principle. That it's commercially viable to do so. And in fact, it's probably the thing to do.
So Rita wants to know, what is your response to digital marketers who say things like print is dead and we don't do print, especially around niche content?
I had that today. They didn't say print is dead. They just said their client wasn't doing any print media. And I was like, okay, but yeah, I mean, all you can do is educate them about, I mean, they can't say it's dead if you have readers, paid readers, right? You can just give them the facts, but, or, I mean, you can fold it into a larger agreement. So here is a package for you. It includes X, Y, and Z. It could include print advertising. It could include recognition at an event. It could involve like sponsorship of something that you're doing, and you roll it all in. That's how, you know, when I was at Azure, you know, the sponsor packages included print advertising. And I mean, they were, you could do a custom package, but all the package, it included print. That was part of the deal.
Maybe I'm a little aggressive, but I subtly make fun of them for being behind the times. And what I found is people will take gentle ribbing if it's in the right spirit. And also people, if anybody's not going to take that in the right spirit, then they're not going to want to work with us anyway. Or if they are, we can sort of nudge them and say, exactly as you said, Melanie, which is an audience is an audience. And if anything, our price point and our sort of loyalty and engagement indicates that we are reaching an extremely motivated group of people. We also say, yeah, there's a huge package that involves digital components to it. But if anybody's selling you ads, banner ads on a website for digital content, then you're reaching a lot of people's like sort of spam filters or ad blockers. And that's really sort of an outdated way of advertising. So if anything, print is the new digital, you know. And so I like to sort of take it as an opportunity to kind of like shift. And, you know, I think people respond to it generally pretty well, as long as you give them a way to participate instead of, you know, making fun of them. Because the truth is, anybody saying that is probably 5 years behind.
I have a feeling I would know your answer, Janine?
Yeah.
They could just look at your
They can
they can look at your pub.
Yeah, all of the paper that I've used for the past year for my magazines in print, and to say like all of this is spoken for. Like I'm not creating this just to create masses of stuff. Everything that I've put out there is because people want it. So print is definitely not dead.
There's another question there.
Yeah, we have a comment from Kim Walker addressed to Janine. For our online magazine, we're taking the opposite approach of what Janine described. We're beginning to experiment with printing select older content for sale at events.
Sure, I know a lot of Kim's older content from her online magazine. I think a lot of that would be interesting as little leaflets or pamphlets or something. So if that's what you're going to do, sure, give it a try.
I have another question for Janine coming through. Kim V asks, could you expand a bit on the content management system you mentioned to manage your ideas?
Oh, to me?
Yeah.
I use, it's called Notion, notion.io. And it's basically a system that you can create whatever you want out of it. It's, you can have it as spreadsheets or gallery views or table views, all sorts of different views, but basically you input all the content there. So I've used that to create like a structure for a typical magazine issue. And then as I gather information, I put it all into Notion and I tag everything so that when I have a theme emerging, I can see all the tag themes and I can, pull content together. So it's like an external brain system that I use, and it's super customizable. So you can make it do whatever you want it to do.
Is Notion kind of like Basecamp, or?
I suppose it's sort of like Evernote. It's like any of those, but I've been using Notion since 2019. Before that, I used Evernote.
One thing I'm curious about, have any of you ever been approached to have versions of your magazines in different languages, locations? And if so, how did you approach that? Is something that you would consider?
Yeah, we've gotten approached to do it in German, French, and actually the guy who approached us to do it in French ended up just kind of copying the magazine and ripping off a lot of our fonts and designs in a just shy of copyright infringement manner, which was both ingenious and very frustrating. And the one in Spanish is the one that I think has the most likes. But it is interesting because I think that conversation we were just having about digital versus print content, it's a different, depending on the subject matter, it's a very different recipe in many other countries. And so the value of a print publication in a place where print isn't as niche and sort of vinyl, a vinyl analog as it is in like North America, makes for a little bit of a different conversation. Like the folks in Spanish really, really, really wanted to do a blog. And we were just like, it's going to feel super not us. And we remain friendly and we're going to do some events with them. But it was interesting to me because I think a lot more of their print, sort of quotidian print products are not dead. And so because of that, the sort of the relationship with digital and print isn't like our own, where it's sort of like most of the garbage is on the internet and most of like the high value, high touch stuff is either paywalled or in a sort of niche specialty topic. So it made me realize how little I understood some of the international markets as much as I like to think that I didn't. And it's something we're certainly open to and kind of continually discussing. But yeah, I'm curious to anybody else's conversations just because it's an area that I very much would love to conquer, but haven't really figured out how to do it.
Yeah, and interpreting your voice in another language is a whole other thing. There's a lot to unpack there.
100%.
Yeah, we had a partnership with Les Debrouard in Bayard, which is a Bayard title, children's title, and so our children's title was done in collaboration with them. But it had to be a smaller edition because there were some stories that just wouldn't work for the Quebec market, or sometimes we would have to swap out pictures or just to make it more Quebec. But now we're doing it in-house, and it's tricky because now it's the same editor doing both editions, so she can kind of think of the English and the French at the same time, which is much, much better. And then for the Truth and Reconciliation, we did Inuktitut last year. which was hard because there are many dialects, there are many forms of Inuktitut, and to try to figure out which one, like to consult people to find out which one was the most appropriate. That was really hard. It was really hard, but I mean, it happened and we found a great translator, but it's a bit nerve-wracking. Especially since the Day of Truth and Reconciliation is one day, so you can't miss that deadline. Like it's a national holiday, right? So.
How about you, Janine? Has that ever come up for you?
Some of my older books have been translated into Japanese and Chinese a long time ago. And that was interesting just to see my graphic design in a different language like that. So that was fun. But the magazine, no, it doesn't need to be in different languages.
And Japanese is longer, right? Like it takes up more space. I used to work on an ad agency in Japan, and if I remember correctly, Japanese took up more space. Did you have to redo designs?
They took care of all that. I just provided the files, but it turned out great. But that was like over 10 years ago. But the magazine, you know, I've designed it. It's in the language that I speak, and if people want to look at it and they can't read the English, that's fine too. There's lots to entertain oneself in my magazine. So.